They expected me to cry in the dark after my divorce, but instead I danced under the stars in a custom jumpsuit that read Just Unmarried. And the whole world watched. The day I walked into that sterile courthouse to file my divorce papers, I felt something I had not experienced in years. Pure, unadulterated relief. My hands trembled as I signed my name, but not from fear or sadness. They shook with the electric anticipation of a woman who was finally free. But the world around me had different expectations. When I told people I was leaving my husband, they did not ask why. They just looked disappointed, as if I had personally let them down by choosing my own happiness over their comfortable illusions. "But you two looked so perfect together," my neighbor Mrs. Henderson said, her voice dripping with that particular brand of passive-aggressive concern that middle-aged women have perfected. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe, searching for visible signs of my supposed failure. "Could you not just stick it out?" asked my college friend Sarah, the same woman who had complained about her own husband's drinking problem for 5 years straight. "Marriage is hard, Emma. You do not just walk away." Oh, but I did. I walked away from the lies that had become as common as morning coffee in our house. I walked away from finding lipstick on his collar that was not my shade, from discovering hotel receipts in his pockets for weekends when he claimed to be working late. I walked away from the gaslighting that made me question my own sanity, from a man who had convinced me that I was lucky he tolerated my presence in his life. I walked away from the version of myself that had shrunk so small I had nearly disappeared entirely. And apparently, that decision made me a villain in the eyes of everyone who knew us. The whispers started immediately. I could hear them in the grocery store, feel them burning into my back at the coffee shop where I used to meet friends for our weekly catch-ups. Those same friends who now found excuses to cancel plans, who suddenly became too busy to return my calls. "She just wants attention," I heard Linda whisper to another woman at the pharmacy. Linda, who had cried on my shoulder for hours when her own marriage was crumbling, who had begged me to listen to her problems, but now could not spare an ounce of compassion for mine. "She thinks she is better than everyone now," came the cruel assessment from someone I had considered a close friend, acting like she is some kind of feminist icon just because she got divorced. The judgment was suffocating. It was like getting divorced meant I had failed as a woman, as if my worth was entirely tied to my ability to maintain a marriage, regardless of how toxic it had become. Every conversation felt like a trial, where I was perpetually guilty until proven innocent, and the evidence of my innocence was apparently supposed to be my willingness to stay in a relationship that was slowly killing my spirit. At the supermarket, I overheard 2 women discussing my situation while standing in the cereal aisle. "I heard she just up and left without even trying counseling," one said, shaking her head with theatrical disappointment. "Some people just give up too easily these days." What they did not know was that I had tried counseling. I had begged him to go with me, had attended sessions alone when he refused, had read every self-help book on marriage I could find. What they did not know was that I had tried to save something that had been dead for years, that I had performed CPR on a relationship that had flatlined long before I finally pulled the plug. But what they really did not know was that I was not mourning the end of my marriage. I was celebrating the beginning of my life. The realization hit me on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the divorce papers were signed. I was sitting in my new apartment, a cozy 1-bedroom space that I had decorated exactly how I wanted it, with bright colors and plants and books scattered everywhere. The morning light streamed through windows that I had chosen, illuminating a space that was entirely mine. For the first time in years, I was not walking on eggshells. I was not calculating my words before speaking, not monitoring my facial expressions to avoid triggering his anger. I was not pretending to find his jokes funny or agreeing with his opinions to keep the peace. I was liberated, and I was about to throw a party that would prove it to everyone. The idea came to me like a lightning bolt of pure inspiration. If society wanted to treat my divorce like a funeral, then I would show them what a resurrection looked like. If they expected me to hide in shame, I would celebrate in the most spectacular way possible. I called it a divorce party. The theme? Till death did us part. Because my old life had died, and I was ready to live again. I spent weeks planning every detail with the same care that most people put into their weddings. I booked a rooftop venue downtown, A stunning space with twinkling lights and a view of the city skyline. I hired a DJ who specialized in empowerment anthems and dance music that would make even the most reluctant partygoer move their feet. For my outfit, I commissioned a custom white jumpsuit from a local designer. It was sleek and sophisticated, with wide legs that flowed like a dress and a fitted top that made me feel like a goddess. Across the back, in elegant script, were the words "Just Unmarried." On the front, a small embroidered heart with a crack through the middle that had been mended with gold thread. A nod to the Japanese art of kintsugi, the practice of repairing broken pottery with gold to make it more beautiful than before. The cake was a masterpiece that took my breath away when I saw it. It was a split-tier design, with one side representing my old life, dark, heavy and constraining, and the other side representing my new beginning, bright, colorful, and free. On top, instead of the traditional bride and groom figurines, there was a sugar sculpture of me in my jumpsuit, literally kicking a tiny groom figure off the edge of the cake. The invite list was the most carefully curated part of the entire event. I invited everyone, my family, my friends, my coworkers, and yes, even the people who had judged me. I wanted them all to see exactly what Joy looked like without him in the picture. The invitations themselves were works of art. They were designed to look like wedding invitations at first glance, complete with elegant calligraphy and formal phrasing. But instead of announcing a union, they announced my freedom. Emma Richardson cordially invites you to celebrate the end of her marriage and the beginning of her happily ever after. Come toast to new beginnings, second chances, and the courage to choose yourself. The RSVPs came flooding in. Some people accepted with enthusiasm, others with curiosity, and a few with what I suspected was a morbid desire to witness what they assumed would be my public breakdown. The week leading up to the party was a whirlwind of final preparations and mounting excitement. I had photographers lined up to capture every moment, a videographer to document the evening, and a social media team to help me share the celebration with the world. The morning of the party, I woke up with a sense of anticipation that I had not felt in years. I spent the day at the spa, getting a massage, facial, and having my hair styled in loose waves that cascaded down my shoulders. My makeup was flawless, bold red lips, dramatic eyes, and a glow that came from within. As I slipped into my custom jumpsuit and looked at myself in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Gone was the subdued, apologetic version of myself that had existed during my marriage. In her place stood a confident, radiant woman who was ready to reclaim her narrative. The party started at 7, and by 6:30, I was already at the venue, making final checks and greeting the early arrivals. The rooftop had been transformed into a celebration of liberation. Fairy lights twinkled overhead, creating a canopy of stars. The bar was stocked with champagne and cocktails with names like Freedom Fizz and Liberation Martini. The DJ was spinning upbeat tracks that had people moving before they even realized they were dancing. As the sun set and the guests began to arrive, I positioned myself at the entrance to greet everyone personally. The looks on their faces were priceless. Some people were genuinely excited and happy for me, pulling me into warm hugs and telling me how proud they were of my courage. Others looked confused, as if they were not sure whether they were at a celebration or a wake. My sister arrived early, beaming with pride and carrying a bouquet of flowers. "You look absolutely stunning," she said, tears in her eyes. "I am so proud of you for doing this." My parents came next, and while I could see the concern in their eyes, they were supportive. My mother, who had initially been devastated by my divorce, pulled me aside and whispered, "I was wrong to question your decision. Seeing you like this, so happy and confident. This is who you are supposed to be." But it was the arrival of my former friends that really made the evening interesting. Linda, who had whispered about me seeking attention, walked in wearing a forced smile and immediately began complimenting my appearance with the kind of over-the-top enthusiasm that screamed insincerity. Sarah, who had told me I should have stuck it out, kept looking around the party with wide eyes, as if she could not believe what she was seeing. The moment that made everything worthwhile came when Mrs. Henderson, my judgmental neighbor, arrived fashionably late in a dress that was clearly more expensive than anything she usually wore. She approached me with a sheepish expression and said, "Emma, I owe you an apology. I had no idea. I mean, you look so happy, so free, I think I was projecting my own fears onto your situation. As the evening progressed, the energy of the party became infectious. The dance floor was packed, with people of all ages moving to the music and celebrating life. The photographer captured candid moments of pure joy, friends laughing together, couples dancing under the stars, and me, right in the center of it all, glowing with happiness. The cake-cutting ceremony was the highlight of the night. I had planned a little speech to go along with it, but when the moment came, I found myself overwhelmed with emotion. Standing in front of all these people, holding a knife that would symbolically cut away my past, I felt the weight of what I had accomplished. A year ago, I thought my life was over. I began, my voice carrying across the rooftop. I thought that divorce meant failure, that leaving my marriage meant I was giving up on love. But tonight, surrounded by all of you, I realized that I was not giving up on love. I was finally learning to love myself. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. As I cut into the cake, symbolically removing the groom figurine from my life, people began taking photos and videos. The moment was magical, empowering, and absolutely perfect. But the real magic happened when those photos and videos started making their way onto social media. Within hours, my divorce party was going viral. People were sharing clips with captions like, "Divorce never looked this good," and "Normalize celebrating freedom." The hashtag divorce party goals started trending, and my story was being shared by accounts with millions of followers. The responses were overwhelmingly positive. Women from around the world were commenting on the posts, sharing their own stories of liberation, and thanking me for showing them that divorce could be a celebration rather than a tragedy. "This woman is my Roman Empire," read one comment that made me laugh out loud. "I need this energy in my life," said another. "Where can I buy that jumpsuit?" was a common question that had me considering launching my own clothing line. But the funniest part of the entire evening was watching the same women who had shamed me for my divorce suddenly trying to insert themselves into my success story. Linda, who had whispered about me wanting attention, was suddenly at my side asking, "Can we take a pic with you? This is so iconic, Emma. Seriously." Sarah, who had told me I should have stuck it out, was now telling anyone who would listen that she had always supported my decision, and that she was so proud of me for following my heart. My favorite interaction came from a woman who had been particularly cruel in her judgment of my divorce. She approached me near the end of the night, slightly tipsy from the champagne, and said with complete sincerity, "Wait, can you send me your planner's information? Just in case." Just in case. The phrase was loaded with implication, and I could see in her eyes that she was reevaluating her own situation, wondering if she too might someday need to plan her own liberation celebration. The party officially ended at midnight, but the impact was just beginning. Over the next few days, my phone was constantly buzzing with notifications. My story was being picked up by bloggers, podcasters, and even traditional media outlets. A popular women's empowerment podcast reached out to have me as a guest. The host, a woman named Maria who had built a following by sharing stories of women who had overcome adversity, interviewed me for over an hour about my journey from marriage to freedom. "What I love about your story," she said during our conversation, "is that you refuse to let society dictate how you should feel about your divorce. You took control of your own narrative." That interview led to more opportunities. A lifestyle magazine wanted to feature my story in their Women Who Inspire section. A morning talk show invited me to discuss the growing trend of divorce parties and how they could help women reframe their relationship with endings. But the most meaningful development came when I decided to launch my own platform to continue the conversation. I created an Instagram account called Freedom Looks Good on You, dedicated to celebrating women who had chosen themselves over settling for less than they deserved. The account grew rapidly, with women from around the world sharing their own stories of liberation. Some had left marriages, others had ended toxic relationships, quit soul-crushing jobs, or made other major life changes in pursuit of their happiness. Each story was different, but they all shared a common thread: the courage to choose authenticity over acceptance. I began featuring these women on the account, sharing their photos and stories with captions that celebrated their strength and resilience. The community that formed around the account was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was supportive, empowering, and utterly transformative. One post that particularly resonated with me was from a woman named Jessica in Colorado. She had left her marriage after 23 years and was terrified of being judged by her community. After seeing my story, she decided to throw her own divorce party. The photos she shared showed her surrounded by friends, wearing a t-shirt that said, "Newly single and ready to mingle with life," laughing with the kind of joy that comes from deep within. "Your story gave me permission to celebrate my freedom instead of apologizing for it," she wrote in her caption. "Thank you for showing me that divorce is not the end of my story. It is just the beginning of my next chapter." Another woman, Sarah from London, shared how she had used my story as inspiration to leave an abusive relationship. She had not thrown a party, but she had marked her freedom with a solo trip to Paris, where she took photos of herself in front of the Eiffel Tower wearing a custom t-shirt that read "Survivor, Thriver, and Absolutely Fabulous." The impact of these stories was profound, not just for the women sharing them, but for me as well. I began to realize that my divorce party had been about more than just celebrating my own freedom. It had been about giving other women permission to celebrate theirs as well. 6 months after my party, I received a message that brought tears to my eyes. It was from a teenage girl whose parents were going through a difficult divorce. She had seen my story and wanted to thank me for showing her that divorce did not have to be a source of shame for families. "My mom has been so sad and embarrassed about the divorce," she wrote. "But after seeing your story, she realized that she could be proud of choosing happiness over staying in a marriage that was not working. She is planning her own celebration, and she asked me to help her plan it. Thank you for showing us that endings can be beautiful too." The financial opportunities that came from my viral moment were unexpected but welcomed. Brands began reaching out, wanting to partner with me on campaigns that aligned with my message of self-empowerment. I became a spokesperson for a jewelry company that specialized in celebration pieces, jewelry designed to mark major life transitions. I partnered with a clothing brand to create a line of freedom fashion that included jumpsuits, t-shirts, and accessories with empowering messages. But the most rewarding aspect of my newfound platform was the speaking opportunities. I was invited to conferences, women's groups, and corporate events to share my story and talk about the importance of self-advocacy and the courage to make difficult changes. One speech that particularly stands out was at a women's leadership conference in Chicago. I spoke to an audience of over 1,000 women about the difference between surviving and thriving, about the importance of refusing to let other people's expectations dictate your choices. "Society will try to convince you that ending something is always a failure," I told the audience. "But sometimes, ending something is the most courageous thing you can do. Sometimes walking away is not giving up, it is growing up." The standing ovation that followed was overwhelming. Women approached me afterward with tears in their eyes, sharing their own stories of times when they had chosen themselves over the expectations of others. A year after my divorce party, I was invited back to the same rooftop venue to speak at an event celebrating women's achievements. As I stood in the same spot where I had cut my liberation cake, I reflected on how much my life had changed. The woman who had once shrunk herself to fit into a marriage that was slowly suffocating her was gone. In her place stood someone who had learned that her worth was not tied to her relationship status, that her happiness was not dependent on someone else's approval, and that her dreams were valid regardless of what others thought about them. The people who had judged me for my divorce were now among my biggest supporters. They tagged me in posts about female empowerment, shared my content on their own social media accounts, and recommended my story to their friends who were going through similar situations. The transformation was remarkable, but it was not just about them changing their minds about me. It was about me changing my mind about myself. I had learned that I did not need anyone's permission to be happy. I did not need to justify my choices to people who had never walked in my shoes. I did not need to apologize for choosing myself over settling for less than I deserved. The success of my platform had opened doors I never could have imagined. I had written a book about my experience, which became a bestseller, and was being adapted into a documentary. I had launched a podcast where I interviewed other women who had made courageous life changes. I had created a line of celebration products for women marking major transitions in their lives. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome was the community that had formed around the message of celebrating freedom. Every week, I received messages from women who had found the courage to make difficult changes in their own lives after being inspired by my story. They shared photos of their own celebrations. Some threw parties like I had, others marked their freedom with solo trips, new tattoos, career changes, or simply by learning to say no to things that no longer served them. Each story reminded me that my divorce party had been about more than just celebrating the end of my marriage. It had been about celebrating the beginning of my authenticity, my willingness to be true to myself regardless of what others thought. As I write this, 2 years after that magical night on the rooftop, I am living a life that feels completely authentic to who I am. I wake up every morning excited about the possibilities the day might bring. I make decisions based on what feels right for me, not on what others expect me to do. I have not remarried, and I am not looking to do so anytime soon. I am enjoying the process of getting to know myself again, of discovering who I am when I am not trying to be someone else's idea of the perfect wife. The women who once whispered about my divorce now ask me for advice about their own relationships. They want to know how I found the courage to leave, how I dealt with the judgment, how I rebuilt my life from scratch. My answer is always the same. I stopped trying to be perfect and started trying to be authentic. I stopped apologizing for my choices and started celebrating them. I stopped shrinking myself to fit into other people's expectations and started expanding to fill my own potential. The rooftop where I threw my divorce party has become a symbol of transformation for me. Every time I drive past it, I remember that night when I chose celebration over sorrow, when I chose to dance under the stars instead of crying in the dark. They wanted me to be ashamed of my divorce, to hide it like a dirty secret, to wear it like a scarlet letter that marked me as a failure. Instead, I wore it like a badge of honor, a symbol of my courage to choose myself over settling for less. They expected me to cry in the dark after my divorce, but instead I danced under the stars in a jumpsuit with my name on it. And now they all want to be in my pictures, not knowing that I already cropped them out of my story the moment I decided that their opinions no longer mattered. The girl who once sought approval from everyone around her is gone. In her place stands a woman who has learned that the only approval that matters is the one she gives herself, that the only validation she needs is the knowledge that she is living authentically, courageously, and on her own terms. And if that is not worth celebrating, I do not know what is. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales of women who chose courage over comfort, authenticity over approval, and themselves over settling. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that matter, stories that might just give someone else the courage to write their own chapter of freedom. Hit that subscribe button and join our community of women who believe that endings can be beautiful beginnings.